Welcome back. The Office of the Secretary of Defense says 17 areas are off limits to cuts in the defense budget the Trump administration will undertake. OSD says it'll shift $50 billion as part of what it calls a, quote, relook. Major General Arnold Punaro, U.S. Marine Corps retired, as president and CEO of the Punaro Group. His latest book is titled, If Confirmed, An Insider's View of the National Security Confirmation Process. General, welcome. It's great to have you back on the program. As you look at the relook, what do you expect to see the areas that are not exempt among those that are not in those 17 areas that DOD will take a relook at?
Well, France, it's a privilege to be with you. This is a subject you and I have dealt with for many decades together. And we need to get more bang for the buck in the Department of Defense for the dollars we spend. And I applaud the new secretary for taking this on. And I think they're going to be looking at the overhead. They're going to be looking at the size of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. They're going to be looking at the 28 defense agencies. They're going to look at the size of the civilian workforce, which is over 800,000 people. Since 9/11, we've actually increased the size of the civilian workforce, and we've decreased the size of the active duty warfighting force. So I think the new secretary has got to focus on lethality and warfighting, and in my judgment, that's the right focus for the Department of Defense.
Where do you expect to see the money that comes from those areas go to, General?
Well, there's some priorities that he's actually articulated and that the president talked about in the campaign. You're going to see a sizable increase in what they were referring to now as the Golden Dome, which will be missile protection over the United States of America and our territories. I think you're going to see additional money going to some of the high technology areas where we're a little bit behind, maybe a lot behind, like hypersonics, certainly investment in artificial intelligence and things of that nature. He's going to be improving the warfighting readiness of our military forces. So these are the right priorities in my judgment.
How much latitude does the administration have before they start to run into trouble, into dissonance from the 4 jurisdictional committees on the Hill?
Well, as you know, the current law under, Article 1, no money shall be spent except in appropriation from the Treasury by law. And so the committees, once they submit the FY26 budget, and by the way, as you know, we haven't passed the FY25 budget, and we're in a real danger of having a year-long continuing resolution, which would be devastating to the Department of Defense. And so Congress kind of needs to get its act together too. But once they get the FY26 budget, like they always do, they'll look at it very carefully, the authorizers and the appropriators, and make judgments about the change in priorities. I think there's going to be a lot of support for a number of the new priorities. Obviously, there are always going to be concerns, but I think, again, as long as it fits under a strategic rubric that we want to increase deterrence, because the last thing we want to do is go to war. But if we do have to go to war with one of our adversaries, we want to be able to win those wars. And so that's, I think, where the focus is of the new Secretary of Defense and the administration.
You hit on the Hill dynamic, too, that I wanted to bring up next, which is we don't have a budget for 25 yet. 26 is around the corner. Right. New administration typically takes a new administration longer to submit their request. So there's still a lot of moving parts here as far as knowing where the money's going to go for this year, let alone for next year.
That's correct. And again, I want to underscore, I hate to say it, but when it comes to the appropriation process, first of all, the individuals are great. Don't get me wrong. The national security leadership on both sides of the aisle, very strong, but the processes in the Congress are totally broken. I refer to it as the broken branch. They haven't passed 12 appropriation bills in a quarter of a century. And again, we've never had a year-long CR in defense. We're at grave risk of having one because of the breakdown. They're focused on this reconciliation bill, which is going to be important, but we also need to pass the appropriation bills.
Well, the NDAA process is about to get underway in both chambers for 2026. What do you expect to see, and how do you expect this relook to potentially influence that?
Well, I would say the authorizers have an unbroken great record of passing the NDAA for 62 straight years. I have every confidence they'll do it again. The Senate Armed Services Committee is very focused on confirmations right now. The Department of Defense has 65 positions, all the top civilian leadership positions, requiring Senate confirmation. Of which we only have actually 2 people confirmed of the 65. We've got a lot in the pipeline, so they need to focus on that. The second thing is we're going to have some senior military replacements. There have been some changes there, as you well know. The new people that are going to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the chief of naval operations and other senior have to go through the Senate confirmation process. So the SASC is going to be working on both the FY26 budget when they get it, and they've already had a couple of combatant commander hearings, but they're also going to be very focused, and they have 5 positions at the Department of Energy that run the nuclear administration, so they have to do those as well.
I mentioned your book, If Confirmed, an insider's view of the national security confirmation process. What's your sense of how well that's tracking right now as far as getting the nominees vetted, getting them before the committees?
Well, I would also give the new administration high marks, particularly compared to Trump 1. They're well ahead of their pace, double the number of people in the cabinet that they've gotten confirmed early on as compared to the first time. It doubled the number of the Biden administration. We have 15 nominations pending for the Senate in the Senate Armed Services Committee. That's a pace well in advance of the previous pace. What happens, though, is they get out once they get out of Armed Services Committee. The SASC is not the problem. They get out on the Senate floor, and then they get put in purgatory, these interminable holes that people put on the nominations, and then the majority leader has to use the cloture process, which burns a lot of time in the Senate. So we're encouraging, in my book, I encourage some major reforms into how the confirmation process works. It's kind of broken, just like the process for the budget is broken.
I enjoyed the conversation with you about your book on the FedGov Today podcast. That's in our archive at fedgovtoday.com, and it's great to have you on the show, General.
Well,
Thank
it's
you.
a privilege to be here.
You can read more about